I wanted to really check and see if Aaron Rodgers is actually a playoff choker or if that's just a narrative that's been put around him. There's actually some interesting statistics about Aaron Rodgers, but statistics are always really difficult without a trained eye. You have to really know what to look for. So, several examples I can think of right off the top. A lot of people will point to things like Rodgers has a very high passer rating in the postseason, very high EPA per play, stats like that are typically pretty good stats. But of course, you have to understand them all in context. So that's what I want to do in this video, is kind of talk about Rodgers' clutchness, whether it comes to end of game situations in the postseason or just postseason stats in general, and talk about how he matches up against Brady, really, because let's be honest, that's what's the interesting thing about this is he more or less clutch than Tom Brady? Because the narrative, of course, is that Brady is much more clutch than Rodgers. Do the numbers back that up? Initially, there's numbers that heavily favor Aaron Rodgers. His passer rating is higher than Brady's in the postseason, and again, EPA per play higher than Brady's in the postseason. In fact, obviously that's a little bit misleading, right? Because Rodgers played in a different era than Brady. You expect those numbers to be better. But even a more interesting thing is if you compare the numbers with each other. So, for example, you compare Tom Brady's passer rating in the playoffs versus regular season passer rating, and Aaron Rodgers' passer rating in the playoffs and his regular season passer rating. Rodgers sees less of a decline than Brady does. Everyone's numbers go down in the postseason. That, you're playing better competition. That makes sense. But Rodgers' numbers don't go down as severely. So this seems like point Aaron Rodgers. However, of course, it is not that simple. And in fact, one I think very fascinating thing to point out is just how few amount of early round games Tom Brady has had. The guy's only had a small handful of wild card rounds, whereas that's most of what Aaron Rodgers has done. That's the biggest category for him. Whereas for Brady, it's more divisional round matchups, and obviously Brady has played in 10 Super Bowls, Rodgers just one. So as the competition level rises, it's not exactly fair to simply just compare Brady's statistics and Rodgers' statistics. You kind of got to look at them round by round, so that's what I decided to do. So here we go. These are the round by round statistics this is their passer rating. This is not adjusting for inflation or anything, just simply passer rating, and there's some interesting stuff here. So Rodgers' passer rating in the wild card round, slightly better, a couple points better. The divisional round, it's actually significantly better, a 10-point increase. The conference championship is the most difficult round for both of them, which of course makes some sense, I think, because, just thinking about it logically, that is going to be the hardest game you have to play outside of the Super Bowl. However, you at least get an extra week to prepare during the Super Bowl, which I think you could argue favors the offense, and the statistics back that up. Whereas in conference championship, you still only get that 1 week. You aren't going to be as rested, so it makes sense that your numbers won't be as good. Now, another thing I should mention while we're strictly talking passer rating, obviously passer rating is more, it's not an individual stat. It kind of is, but kind of isn't. Obviously, the situation that you're in, the talented receivers you have around you, the good play callers you have for you, which, both of these guys have had plenty of talented receivers and plenty of good play callers for them over the years. All of that factors in, which is why passer rating isn't my favorite stat to use, but it's kind of the best stat to use for this, the one that, it's one that goes back to the beginning of Brady's career. There's not a ton of stats like that. EPA per play, quite frankly, it's a little bit better of a passer rating. It still has all of the flaws. It's just a little better. Could have used that as well, but that would have taken like 5 times as long. So decided to go with the passer rating, especially since a lot of the flaws are still going to be there. But you could argue if you're someone who believes Brady has had better teams, that's something in his benefit. Or if you're someone who believes Rodgers has had better teams over his career, that's in his benefit. But these are the tables. Finally, the Super Bowl, that's actually Brady's best category, interestingly enough, in the second best category here outside of Rodgers in the divisional round. Typically, Rodgers plays very well in the divisional round. That San Francisco game was the exception, not the rule. Also, I decided to not put Rodgers' one Super Bowl there just because it's a one-game sample size. I felt like that would make the graph misleading, but you see it at the bottom and with the asterisks. Rodgers' one Super Bowl, he had an impressive 111.5 passer rating. He played very well in that Super Bowl. I think this chart will be a lot more telling in terms of who is or isn't good in each of these rounds. So what you're looking at here is this is just simply adjusting to the players' passer ratings. So how well do they do compared to what they do in the regular season, which I think is probably going to give us a more accurate representation of, again, we're not arguing who is better or who is worse, who is more clutch, who's the better postseason performer, who rises to the occasion during the postseason that doesn't during the regular season. Or I guess, both of these guys rise to the occasion in the regular season as well, but you know what I'm trying to say. Now, again, you might argue, especially if you're a Rodgers fan, isn't this an unfair way to do it? Comparing Rodgers, postseason stats against his regular season stats. Rodgers' regular season stats over his career are better than Brady's. I would say no, I don't believe that to be an unfair way to do this, simply because if you do adjust for inflation, Brady actually has a better passer rating than Rodgers, but if you don't adjust for inflation, Rodgers is better. So this is kind of my way of also adjusting for inflation a little bit. And if you see that, the numbers definitely shift in Brady's favor. Rodgers' numbers get more worse during the wildcard rounds than Brady's do. Rodgers is still better in the divisional round. So that's the one round Rodgers is good at. Again, the one San Francisco game excluded, he plays very well in that divisional round. You don't want to have to play him then. Either play him wildcard round weekend or, ideally play him on the NFC Championship game, where you see there minus 24.2 passer rating points from what he typically is at. Brady's also goes down. Again, it's hard. Conference championship games, you're going to play some good talent, but Brady's not quite as much, just 12.3. The Super Bowls, again, actually both of these guys go up. Brady's 0.4 and Rodgers only played in one. And again, I'm not saying it's his fault or anything. That's just the reality of the situation. He's only played in one. Another interesting factor about all this, I think people have pointed to how well Brady does in the final 5 minutes of the game, being able to run these last minute drives, putting his team up in the Super Bowl, all of that stuff, which is maybe a bit overblown, but he is still that has been something he's added value to. So does Rodgers come up small in the big moments? Not really. There's only really been 4 situations where he's actually had an opportunity to do something like that, to be able to, will his team to victory when they're down. And by situation, I mean in the final 5 minutes, having a chance to take the lead with less than, 5 minutes left. So 5 minutes left, you either have the ball when it's tied or have the ball when you're down by 6 or less points. And he's done relatively as expected in those situations. He hasn't been great. He hasn't been horrible either. In those 4 situations, they're 1 and 3. But you look at those situations. There was one where they had a 25.5% chance, one which was a 57.5% chance of winning. That was the game in Dallas, and that's the one where they did win. One with only an 11.5% chance, and finally, the most recent game, San Francisco, a 50.6% chance. That's the only one where it went the wrong way, where they had over a 50% chance and lost, or had under 50% chance and won, but it was still 50.6%. So we're talking a little over half a percentage point better chance that they would win than lose and lost. So I guess you could point to that one if you want to and say, Rodgers came up small in that moment. That's not really true. Okay, maybe in that one a little bit, but that's the only one you can really argue, in my opinion. So is Aaron Rodgers a playoff choker? Well, no, he's not a playoff choker. I think that's out of the question. He's clearly a good, especially good rounds 1 and 2 quarterback. You could argue he comes up small in the conference championship. I think that's a fair thing to point out, but also listen, if you get compared to Brady, you're going to come up small. That's typically how it works. And quite frankly, you could even find a way to look at these numbers and swing it as a pro-Rodgers thing and an anti-Brady thing if you wanted. And I think, I'm sure some Packers fans watching this will do that. And they'll say, well, hey, it's not totally fair because Rodgers does so much better in the regular season. Again, I don't think that's a smart way to look at this, just because we saw a couple of big passing booms both in around 2010 and also 2015. So Rodgers gets the full benefit of that, whereas Brady's only gotten about half and a quarter of the benefit throughout the course of his career. So that's kind of why I'm hesitant towards, why I think adjusting for inflation is very important. Just the sports have changed. So that's what I think. What do you guys think of all of this? Let me know in the comments below. Always love hearing from you. And of course, as always, thanks for watching.